Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
That should do it.
Jay, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
New Year.
I'll drink coffee to that.
I'll drink a bigger one. How's Cali doing? California survived New Year's Eve?
Other than, weird storms and things like that, New Year's Eve pulled off okay.
Yeah.
Our last dog was a Vizsla, and he was terrified of firecrackers, and even little ones. And Sky, if the really big boomer, somebody's homemade dynamite stick or something blew, he would bark, kind of like a car door closing in front of the house. He would bark, but just briefly. There was no cowering, there was no trembling, there was no, they bred these dogs to chase lions. I think fear is like bred out of this breed entirely. This dog has as much frontal midline pain as I do. So.
Yeah, dogs don't, at least the dogs that I've had, they don't like fireworks. The last one I had was an Irish Wolfhound, and one of the bigger dogs you can get, and just
fabulous dog. Unfortunately, the giant breeds are very short-lived. They're lucky to make 7 years usually.
Yeah, you don't get your value.
Quality times time.
Quality,
it's a difficult calculation.
Dr.
I'd rather have an
Swingle.
Irish Wolfhound for 7 years than a Chihuahua for a decade.
Uh-oh. Chihuahua's like a cat with a longer tail or shorter tail.
A very shaky cat.
Yeah,
Happy New Year.
He absolutely did not cower or anything to any of the fireworks. The little fireworks, he didn't even respond to them. But the gigantic boomers, or some people shooting guns, that happens as well. He would bark very briefly, but nothing, no cowering or anything like that. As I say, I think they bred fear out of this dog. They're bred to chase lions. I mean, how fearful do you have to be to chase a lion? You gotta be a little loopy, I think.
Well, if you're the Chicago Bears, you don't chase them very well.
Yeah.
Dr. Murphy, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
New year, new you. Oh man, the gyms are full.
New year, new noodle. Come on. How did you miss that
drank
one, Jay?
I drank the Happy New Year with Pete. Here's Happy New Year with you as well.
Boy, those gyms are packed. Can't even get in there.
What's a gym?
Yeah, and the people look confused mostly too. What do I do here?
Yeah.
And the counseling offices, they're slowed down.
No, I don't. Don't think so. Don't think so. Yeah.
The holidays are boom time for psychiatry.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say in December, Dr. Marie, I thought they're burning out their insurance. Now they're waiting to fill their deductibles up.
Well, I mean, we talk about different reasons, but a little bit of a saying is, in good times, people can afford to take care of themselves, and in bad times, people need to. So if you're a good therapist, then you generally speaking have a good practice. So
like you.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah.
And,
but is this the
things changed as of this year as well in insurance land here in the U.S. The Medicare basically opened up to paying therapists, master's degree counseling therapists, MFCs, or all the little initials of various kinds that they have. Those are all now payable from Medicare.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, great, I got to work with people like my age, So, but in the U.S., there's over 9 million people under 65 that are on Medicare because of various disabilities and so forth. So, there's actually a large Medicare marketplace out there that's just now opened up, and I think a lot of them don't even know that it's a possibility for them. So this is the time of year to get some promotional material out in front of some brain brightening for seniors, dementia versus depression, and there's
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff you can start to work with, and um, and again, a brand new funding source that's approved, top down. So
I thought that would be a nice topic, Jay and Dr. Marie, is the brain brightening, because Medicare opened up and, some elders don't know what brain brightening is. And oh my
yeah.
goodness, where are my keys?
What do you mean mild cognitive impairment? I'm just freaking cognitively impaired, So there are plenty of people out there that are seniors. There are some of them that live in like a Dell Web upscale active living retirement village of some sort, and they're all well to do, and have disposable income, and they can afford any kind of a copay or whatever, and um, they're they're all worried about their cognitive decline. Who 65 and over isn't somewhat concerned about it. So, a little lecture at the library, a little free half-hour chat session or something. You're going to bring in a lot of people,
I
and
want to go to the other side. If there are any, why does this keep on happening? Yeah, if there are any politicians out there or social workers listening, for individuals that are not independently wealthy, a very, very good investment in terms of healthcare is cognitive lucidity of elders, and maintaining cognitive lucidity. Because I mean, the cost, if we just want to talk about cost, the generalized cost to the population is very, very high.
yeah,
And then, of course, if we want to talk about, humanity and the individual, quality of life, we could go on and
yeah,
on and on. So I think, whoever's listening, the cost of the third part of life is just as much as the lower one. It's the middle years are relatively inexpensive, but raising young kids and then taking care of elders is huge.
The problem,
yeah,
the problem from what I hear is um, the Medicare will pay for talk therapy, let's just say 160 an hour, and they'll pay neurofeedback at 65 an hour. Is it possible for a therapist to learn neurofeedback and kind of do both and bill for the
Yeah.
160? It's the billing
Yes.
game. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, one of the things many of us do, I mean, I have to be a little bit cautious because I'm not too familiar with the US system.
Yeah.
But, many of us do brain driving as we talk. So essentially, you're doing neurotherapy literally in combination with talk therapy. So there are many what we call passive forms of neurotherapy that can be ideally combined with talk therapy. And then, of course, you can have active forms, which is some of the things that we do with children, wherein they do a run of active, where they're cognitively engaging in the feedback loop. So, for example, with ADHD, they're trying to take down their good old theta, or perhaps their alpha, and then you do 5 minutes of talk or an educational exercise, etc. Blend it. It is so powerful when you blend. I mean, that's a key thing that we do here at the Swingle Clinic. We blend all the time.
What's the difference between doing neurofeedback or like playing a board game with I'm not a counselor, but I've seen what they do. You do a card game or something and you're having a conversation and
Mhm.
you're not charging to play the card game, you're charging to do the talk therapy.
Mhm.
Neurofeedback shouldn't be different than doing a board game or cards, right?
Well, it's a really good point. If you're talking about play therapy, right? Are you just playing? No, you're engaging with a child. Or let me actually say art therapy. That's probably a better one. You're engaging with a child as you're drawing. Now, some art therapists say what they're drawing is important. I tend to be on the other side. It's an activity where you can engage with an individual. They can start to express themselves through their hand as they speak, etc. So yes, what do you charge for? What is the billing code? And I think that's the major issue with all the systems. It's about silly billing codes as opposed to I am certified, I am registered, I am educated in this, I am capable of helping, and this is my hourly rate. Right. Yeah.
If you're a talk therapist, you can hire a technician, you can get the equipment and have a holistic, offering because can you take a drug and help with your cognitive abilities? Like, is there a drug out there that can do a better job than neurofeedback? I don't even know.
Because they're
Mm.
called neurotropics.
Okay.
It's a class of various drugs, and their efficacy is usually borderline and somewhat controversial. As an example, DDAVP, which is vasopressin and a little nasal spray, it's supposed to be a nootropic and it gives you a faster alpha frequency and people perform better on testing. But if you're really smart, you realize that if you use that consistently, you're demineralizing your bones. So how freaking smart is that? So if it's such a smart drug, why is it stripping your bone? I mean, you're going to be 20 years of using it on a constant basis. You'd be in a wheelchair.
Yeah. I mean, we're
So,
talking about really bad side effects. We're talking about, well, I mean, all where do we want to go in terms of methylphenidate and brain atrophy and all these type of things. But my generalized statement here is why take a chemical which you have to continue to take when you can actually change the efficiency of your brain. It just doesn't make any sense for those of us who are in the practice of doing this. And I think our key job at this point is getting the word out there. If you invest within key developmental stages in children, wow, what you can do. If you invest in peak performance during your middle years, wow. And then if you invest in the slowing of cognitive decline in your later years, I don't know. I think we're all worth it. And in terms of the trial and error of a lot of the meds, the side effects of the meds, I mean, don't get me wrong. There is a place for them. There's definitely a place for them. Okay. But not this blanket approach. And I think here we go, Pete, to an article that you sent us in terms of, the pharmaceutical model of care, or what I like to say of non-care. Most appointments are 15 minutes and under. What can you really know about a person? And here I'm going to push Jay's button, the wind up Jay button, in terms of somebody comes in and says, I feel depressed. Okay, here, take the yellow pill. What is depression? Right. All of these names we have, obviously we're talking about an experience, not a diagnosis or perception, subjective perception, not an objective, as far as I'm concerned, checklist. And you want to look in the brain and see what's actually going on. What in the brain is causing the subjective expression of what we have chosen to label depression or any other emotion or ailment. Okay, Jay, did I wind you up enough?
Martijn Arns has a fabulous little short video. A man walks in to a store that behind the counter in a white lab coat's a person, and he basically asks for a prescription.
Mhm.
And then they pan back a little bit, and the counter is transparent, and it's like a fishbowl full of various drugs. And the person behind the counter reaches down and swirls it around and pulls out one and hands it to the person. And the person looks at it, it gets this quizzical look like, what the hell? You know, and this is, you know, go to your psychiatrist. If they don't examine your head, they are making a wild guess as to what might be effective. That's the standard of practice. You know, the standard of practice is not to look at the brain activity, it's to guess it based on behavior. And again, the cardiologist analogy, everybody comes in complaining of chest pain, they go straight to an angioplasty. Half of them had indigestion. You know, the complaint, the symptom complaint should tell you what to test, not how to treat.
Yeah,
And
we need a different level of
psychiatry,
sophistication.
psychology still needs to do the testing, and EEG, QEEG, ERPs. There's wonderful ways to test brain function nowadays, much less expensive than fMRI.
So QEEG on depression, are you going to see something dysregulated in the front left?
Now, Pete, that you're falling into the DSM trap. QEEG for what?
I'm just trying to get
Depression. Oh, that. Well, what is that? You know, the iSpot D study looked at over 3,000 people that had depression, and they didn't find left frontal alpha as the characterization of these 3,000 something people. And that's a common kind of misunderstanding within the neurofeedback world is, oh, depression, that's left frontal alpha. Mm-hmm. Well, it can be. They found a subset in women that had right-left asymmetry that was meaningful, but it doesn't characterize the entire group. And here's where male and female separate somewhat, and you can't just lump them all together and not study the differences. Mm-hmm. So we do need to look carefully. We can't willy-nilly pick meds just because of the behavioral presentation. We have to actually do an examination. And in depression, you may have beta spindles right frontally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I could just jump in and build on what Jay was saying is, beautiful early studies on, this is all going back to Davidson's work on the left-right asymmetry, fantastic, but keep up with the literature, folks. Okay. Yeah. It was a really good entry. It's really a good idea to look at it, but there's so many other signatures now. I mean, the depth and uniqueness of each of us and how things express in the brain are phenomenal.
And the lumping together of various presentations. Mm-hmm. Oh, you have mood state, boohoo, sad depression? Oh, yeah. No, you've got agitated anxiety depression. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, you have amotivation, anhedonia depression. They're different animals entirely. They don't look the same in the EEG.
Yeah.
And there's a lumping together of a group called reward deficiency. Mm-hmm. And that includes mood state, anhedonia, and that sort of thing. But it also has eating disorders and OCD and other things lumped into the same, reward deficiency problem. And that has a biomarker of a thalamocortical dysrhythmia at the anterior cingulate, mm-hmm. cognitive and affective division of the anterior cingulate. So, if you don't look at the brain function, you're making a wild guess. Mm-hmm. Oh, this antidepressant might work. Yeah, it might not, might make you worse. If you actually look at the brain activity, you can give a prediction of the efficacy. If you look at the literature for SSRIs, well, efficacy for SSRIs kind of, what's the term? It sucks. It's 40%, 50%. This is not an effective drug. it beats placebo, which is about 35-40%.
Yeah.
So that's how it shows to be effective.
And they're
But
very,
if you
very, very
target the
hard to get off of.
EEG, you can find an 85% success rate in Leslie Pritchup's work, where they looked at the frontal alpha and in OCD, and that's 85% success. If it's a slow pattern in the same spot, it's 15%, which is half of the response of a placebo. It's a non-responding group, basically. And if you have beta up there, you have a really bad response. You predict a negative response to the SSRIs. So, if you look before you dive in the water, which is my grandmother's advice, I think it still works. You end up having the ability to avoid hitting a rock and stepping on the beta with an SSRI, or wasting your time and money trying to treat a theta with an SSRI.
So
The other thing is they're very, very hard to get off of. And that's one of the things, even when there is a place for meds, I don't think the psychiatry is transparent about, sure, we'll try it, but if it doesn't work, how, your symptoms get worse frequently trying to get off of these meds. And I think that's a critical component. The other thing is
serotonin
we're
withdrawal
get
syndrome.
yeah.
There's a whole literature about serotonin withdrawal.
Yeah. Also, let's throw in gender. And here I'm really gonna shake my fist at, white coat, white men, in terms of females and when in the life cycle a lot of these meds are prescribed. And generally speaking, it's during hormonal transformations, and trying to counter I would say natural stages and phases of just being female with an SSRI not only is an insult to gender, making being female an illness. It doesn't. We're absolutely disrespecting the feminine in this regard. So to anybody out there working with young females and adolescents, okay, when the hormones are going woody doody doo, menopause is another one, and also after childbirth. Right. So in terms of postpartum depression, so I just wanted to throw that out there, that these SSRIs are, excuse me, disproportionately prescribed for females based on hormones.
Yeah, and psychiatry has had a thing with women anyway. I mean, hysterical.
Yeah.
Well, what's the root of hysterical?
Good old uterus.
The wandering uterus.
Yeah.
What's the fix for that? So,
take it out.
Anyway, it's a pitiful history. We don't have to focus on it, but for God's sakes, let's not.
But my issue, Jay, is
get stuck there.
It still exists, right? And I think sometimes it's important to go back a few steps so that we're current in our present.
Well, the article talked about, and I'll put it here in the show, the Senator Fetterman, Ketterman, whatever his name is, he's got a whole line of issues. Hopefully he can open up some doors, get some more money out of the insurance companies. But when you're taking a pill, what pill am I taking for depression generally? And what's the efficacy of it versus neurofeedback?
He may not have been treated with a pill.
Yeah.
They haven't really released the detail of how he was treated. He could have had ketamine. He could have had SSRI, could have been a stimulant. There's all sorts of meds.
Yeah.
The important thing about him is that he was open about it. He actually thought it was going to can his career, that he was going to be pitched out of politics. Other people historically being treated for depression would be thrown out of politics.
Yeah.
So it was a big risk, but he had to do it. As he said, when his kid asked him, why am I not enough? He won the race. He's going to be a senator. He's still got a really depressed state. The kids aren't making him happy. And the kids said, why am I not enough? And he realized at that point he needed to be treated because it's not the kid's fault. It's not that they're not enough. And he was treated at probably at a very high level, not a knee-jerk sort of a response. He was hospitalized and treated, but I don't know exactly what they did in his treatment. But it's obvious that he's popped back, and he's quite an animated character, and
he's recovering from a stroke too.
Yeah, and he wears his emotion on his sleeve. So, and who knows what the stroke may have done to create a worsening of a depression or initiate a depression.
What could it have done?
Well, if a stroke can basically give you post-stroke ischemic areas in the brain, less function following the stroke. Stroke could be a bleed or a clot. And the clot is called an embolism or a thrombotic. And that plugs a vessel, and downstream doesn't get enough oxygen and glucose, so you lose function downstream. You get into the hospital, and his wife saved him by getting him to the hospital early. They give him TPA, an enzyme that dissolves strokes, the clot. Mm-hmm. And welcome to the co-host here. But at that point, the clot's gone and the blood flows back in. But the downstream has been anoxic for a period of time. You have lost some cells. So, and there he goes. He's like a warm heated weighted blanket. So he's very calming for me here.
With a drippy
anyway, Fetterman popped back very nicely after his treatment. And again, not specifically as to exactly how he was treated, but the fact is he went in for treatment, and that's one. If you don't go in to be assessed and treated, you're going to be stuck. So,
are you depressed because you had a stroke, or the stroke caused the depression?
We don't know. And I have no clue.
No, I'm just saying hypothetically what.
Well, if we take it away from that specific person, we can kind of but in general, we can have chicken and egg. I always respond yes. Generally speaking, a stroke will make anything you're carrying around, any liability, worse. It could bring it to the forefront. Also, I mean, we're not even, Jay could probably speak with much more knowledge than I, where in the brain, what region was compromised or damaged. So in that case, yes, the stroke could be responsible. But in other situations, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I all of a sudden had one half of my face drooping, I'm sure my mood would not be fantastic, even if my frontal lobes are perfect, right? So I think it's it depends, but yes.
Well, plus he's a politician.
Yeah. But I think the big lesson
there's actually a disproportionate number of strokes on the left hemisphere versus right hemisphere. And there's no difference within the brain that would predict the left being worse than the right. The difference is actually in the chest, at the aortic arch coming off the heart and then descending down into your thorax. There's a vessel coming off into your left brachial artery that feeds the left arm. That's the first off ramp. The next off ramp is the left carotid, internal and external, but at that level, it's just the left carotid. The next one is the right carotid, but off of that comes the right brachial. So if you're a clot floating out, if you go out the arm, that's not a stroke. If you go up the left side, that's a stroke. If you go up the right side, you still have half a chance of taking an off ramp to the right arm. So the two hemispheres have a disproportionate risk factor for thrombotic CVA, more common left than right. And again, it's because of the aortic arch off ramps as to where the clots could flow, and then they make it up into the brain. And goodness knows it's not a good thing to have clogged up.
Okay.
And budgets for schools and mental health, that's always in the news.
Whoa, I can run with this one. I can run with this one.
Well, all the kids are coming back from break, whether it's college or if it's grade school, getting back into the swing of things. And it's like, oh man, school again.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, I mean,
depressed.
very few of us really, really enjoyed school. When you talk, there's this whole misnomer about best time in your life. That was, 40 years ago, and now, I think a lot of systems are falling apart. Really, really falling apart. I think it's, I'm going to kind of I'm going to loop it in with the special education. But in terms of where our budgets are going and why they're going, I think it's very, very positive that we're trying to pay special attention to children that might need more. But I think it's a much bigger issue than the educational system. We've taken away so much of our fundamental support at the family level. And then, kids with a lot of deregulation then are coming into the schools, and just the way police are trying to deal with mental health, now teachers are trying to deal with mental health, and they're just not equipped.
Yeah.
And, the fine line between mental health and learning disability, okay, what we call one, what we call the other, there's a little bridge in terms of behavioral educational, and how an educational complication can turn into a mental health issue very, very quickly. And we're just sticking band-aids on it. If we want to get further political, what special education assistants teachers are paid is disastrous, absolutely disastrous. So yeah, how much longer do you want me to go on here?
Well, it's just labeled wrong.
Yeah.
Right. That's, and then the stigma. When did all the, why did all the asylums get started? Why did all the separation go? Why is there a hospital and why is there, asylums? Anybody have a guess, Jay?
My first laboratory in 1972 was at the North Dakota State Hospital, which was originally named the North Dakota State Hospital for the Insane. So, the history of mental hospitals is not great. In fact, it's atrocious. They were awful, awful places. If you've watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
Yeah.
I worked there. I mean, I recognize all the characters with, different faces and names. The Nurse Ratchet, retired military nurse, running the show. I mean, all of the characters from that movie were there at the state hospital, and there were custodial wards. There were wards full of Parkinson's patients with, the Parkinson's patient needed to be cared for. They don't belong necessarily in a mental hospital, but that's where they were sent. It's in the 1970s. I started in 72. They had just passed the law that if you weren't an immediate harm to yourself or others, that you had to basically be let go out of a state hospital. Now, in California, they just opened the door, threw everybody out. Now you see them on the street. North Dakota got the gold award, the cream of the crud, the best bad system you can imagine.
Yeah.
They actually found spots in halfway houses and spots in North Dakota, the hometown, somehow to get the person cared for. So they carefully discharged people over a 2-year period. I started there 2,500 patients. 3 years later, 750 patients. So the they're still awful places, but they're less. Somebody complained about you, and you get assigned to the state hospital and can't get out. I mean, I saw cases like that were that were there too. So.
How's it different from a prison?
Can I just jump in though before what Jay was talking about? I think is just beautiful. You're talking about a community solution versus an institutional solution, right? And yeah, that goes into the prison thing. An institutional solution, a mental hospital versus a prison. The only difference is why you're in there, right?
Well, which one has more drugs? It's not funny, but I mean, I think money, follow the money. They kind of did it to, shore up budgets, but eventually we're paying for it. I know you're in Canada and we're in the US, but you're paying for it before the fact. We're paying for it after the fact, with the homeless and all that.
Oh, we have an issue up here now. We have an issue up here. Yeah. I mean, the city that I'm in now, Vancouver, we have a horrendous homeless issue. We have a horrendous drug issue. It's not pretty. It's not pretty.
What do you have here, Jay?
This was a private room at the state hospital.
And how did they decide which bed you slept in that night?
Well, you could sleep in the bed. You might, but you might spend a part of the day in the cage.
Yeah.
Not exactly a fabulous circumstance. And
I thought you said solitary confinement makes you worse.
State Hospital for the Insane, Jamestown, North Dakota. So this is old.
But, so no barbed wire.
Yeah. Well,
that's a difference.
Yeah, Peter is fun though. Is absolutely a form of torture is isolation. So.
And here's let me close this. Here's actually our lab. There were patients in the patient room. We were in the equipment room. This is my lab we wrote the grant together, Larry Woodard. You see, he's got hair down his back. I have hair down my back as well. And
hippies.
So anyway, it was an interesting era. So
yeah, what we've learned and what we haven't learned, I think in many regards, we've really advanced in terms of, physical confinement. But our approach of just let everybody out and throw pills at them. This is again where neuro comes in. If we can find the space and the time and the finances to go to the organ.
Like Jay said, the grants, why is it easier to get a grant on the medical side than the mental side?
Yeah, that's changing though. Parity. There's been litigation to establish parity. So you can see the state hospital is actually a gigantic institution. They had their own farm. This is their hospital. They had the admission area and treatment wards, but it was a huge community unto itself. They had their own slaughterhouse for cows and whatnot. So it was quite the circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
It's Alcatraz without the water.
Yeah, it was surrounded by enough open field to
be found in.
Alcatraz. There was snow-covered fields. You couldn't, if you got out, where would you go?
Like Russia.
So, yeah. In the documentary that they shot about me, I gave a little anecdote about the state hospital and some people that came up to the office I was in working a night shift, and they had their coats on. This is in a locked ward, and I look at the chart, and one's in there for homicidal. There's a hold on him for homicide. The other one, equally problematic. And big guys. There's an iron bar right next to me. You could pull out an iron bar and whack somebody pretty good. But I figure, well, I'm not in the business of beating people up with iron bars. And they said, let us out or we're going to beat you up. And I think, well, I could go at it and probably do some damage to them. They probably get some damage on me. But I said, okay, I can let you out, but hold on for a moment. Let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to get to the bottom. I'm going to let you out the top door. You're going to go down 3 flights. At the bottom, there's a door you can jimmy open. You know how, and you're free. But what are you free to do? You're going to run away. Okay, you're going to run away where? Across a snow-covered field. You know what's going to happen? The sheriff is going to be notified that there's somebody gone. And they're going to come out and they're going to drive around. They're going to search with a spotlight. They're going to see you in the middle of the field. Now, the sheriff doesn't really care about patients at the state hospital that much. They're going to drive across the field on their all-wheel drive. They're going to run you down. After they've knocked you down with their vehicle, then they're going to get out, going to bring you back to the state hospital. You're going to be in the medical ward. I let them out. This is exactly what happened. When I left my shift, I went down to the medical ward, and there they were. It's quite predictable. So
you had a runner.
Yeah. Well, and it's an institution whose time has passed. Most of the words that were psych wards are now part of the women's prison for the state, where they do some kind of rehab. Some of them can go off-site during the day and come back at night, that sort of thing. So the purpose of the hospital has changed considerably. Again, they went from 2,500 to 700, and then went down from there.
Jay, 25 years or so before that, Joe Kennedy's kid had an issue, and he paid for some off-site surgery and
ice pick lobotomy.
Yeah.
This is Walter Freeman Jr., who is Walter Freeman III's father. Walter Freeman III is a famous nonlinear EEG analysis person from UC Berkeley. He passed a few years ago in his 90s. Brilliant, brilliant guy. But his father was the inventor of the ice pick lobotomy. They basically go through the eye socket and cut a pathway that innervates the frontal lobe, the medial forebrain bundle. And once that's nicked, you have a lot less affective, you've cut off the frontal lobe, so it dulls affect. People become almost akinetic mutes. So yes, it's an awful procedure. It was popularized back then, but Walter Freeman III lived his entire life trying to live down his father's invention. So they actually sell Freeman. It's like a little tuning fork type deal where you insert it, and then it rocks back and forth a certain amount in order to tell you exactly how much you have to have snipped. Anyway, it's ice pick lobotomy, and it turns you into a vegetable, basically.
So which is better? I mean, how did they think that would help?
Well, those are acts of desperation.
Yeah.
And when I was at the state hospital, there was a state legislator whose kid was in the state hospital, and she was suicidal, and they had done hundreds of ECT sessions on her. The last motivational thing she had going was to do herself in. And she was assigned a one-on-one aide that had to go around and make sure she couldn't kill herself. And if she could get a pencil, she would stick it in her eye. She was serious. And and even with the one-on-one, she had serious attempts. In circumstances like that, it's an act of desperation, and it might end up being the only thing that can keep the person from willful acts of violence on themselves. So,
I'm depressed.
And ECT itself is also a little bit of a last ditch attempt at correcting brain function.
What are they? We'll close on this one. What are they trying to do there? I mean, that's when
Yeah, and there's bilateral, there's unilateral. They're doing it better now than they used to, because they used to have spinal fractures from the convulsions. Now they paralyze you so you don't convulse, and they kind of give you a hypnotic so you're a little more relaxed about the circumstance, and then they blast you. And they're more often right frontal nowadays than bilateral, but depending upon where you are and how old the person is doing the treatment, you might have old bilateral as well still.
I mean, we're talking about chemical energy here. So if you have AFib, they'll put you out, they'll put you under, and they'll reboot you, right? That's a dysregulation that people understand that pays.
It's an attempt at a reboot, basically. And it doesn't always work. And there are extremely common complaints of bad effects on memory. And it's hard to get around that. I mean, it's better than it was. The complaints are less often than they were. At the state hospital, we had a carpenter who couldn't remember how to build anything. We had a person who was playing upright grand piano fabulously, concert pianist level piano player. And they did ECT series on him. He couldn't play the piano. So, there's risk of loss of brain areas. There are areas that are electrolyzed by the current. So, it's a last-ditch effort to try and reboot the brain. And for some people, it works, and for some people, they've had multiple series of it, and it still doesn't work.
But desperation and no choice should never be a place to either start from or end at. And I think, hopefully rounding this out in terms of positive, in terms of the institutions, whether we talk about prisons or mental institutions, places people do not want to be, what we need are more grassroots. If we talk about addiction, for example, I think it's the same in the US. Unless you're a gazillionaire, you can't get a detox bed, but there's a place for you in prison. So, if we can start to get back to the community level, start to get back into forms of therapy that can actually affect semi-permanent or permanent change, that can really help people to the instrument of master control, help the brain to be more efficient. That's the way to go.
TMS is a step before ECT now. And it's circumventing a lot of people from having to have ECT. It's using a 1.5 to 3 Tesla magnet to zap the brain, and if they get the right spot, they do a fairly good job.
Do not use this indiscriminately, which is too often.
But you can actually create an action potential. You can force you to wiggle your fingers with the magnet, so it's actually manipulating your brain pretty strongly.
Or even
Just below that level, you've got all sorts of neuromodulatory techniques, TDCS, direct current stimulation of the brain, alternating current stimulation of the brain, EMF, pulsed EMF on the brain.
don't forget these little things too. A tiny little current going through the mastoid process can be very quieting and very calming. And I don't know about you, but we don't seem to get major side effects on these ones. It's very, very gentle. So there's nothing wrong with electromedicine. It's just, you got to know what you're doing, where you're doing it, and be careful about the strength. More is not necessarily better in many, many circumstances. Yeah, that was the CES I was holding up, by the way.
Yeah, there's a whole hierarchy of approaches, and starting with the less invasive, less damaging potentially are definitely the last thing you want to do is get to the end of that hierarchy and have to have ECT.
Yeah. For addictions, by the way, and alcoholism or other, sometimes just putting some of these a little higher than what you should can help with cravings. And it's, these are little units people can use at home. These are some of the adjuncts that you can use with your neurotherapy. So there's a lot out there,
So, certain cases, turning it up to 11 and spinal tap is good.
I am not endorsing that one.
I'm not. Disclaimer.
Yeah.
Happy New Year, guys. Dr. Swingle, Jay Gunkelman.
Enjoy your day. Have a great New Year.
The Neuronoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.